Communists, Dictator quotations. Karl Marx, 1818-1883, and Friedrich Engels, 1810-1895. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels were key players in the formation of the Communist Party in 1847. In the same year Engels started, and Marx rewrote the Communist Manifesto, which set the stage for a political philosophy they were to spend the rest of their lives spreading. Marxian theory, or Marxism, is the father of all modern-day communist governments. As Marxism sees it, the final solution is for the proletariat, proles, or working class, to overthrow its oppressors, the property owners. Upon review of the document, one item is clear: strip the property holder of his private property and redistribute to the people, meaning those dictators at the top have access to all of it. Marx is quoted, "The abolition of pre-existent property relations is not a process exclusively characteristic of communism. Throughout the course of history, all property relations have been subject to continuous change, unceasing transformation." Communists can sum up their theory in the pithy phrase, "the abolition of private property." Private property exists because only 9/10 of the population have none of it. Under the Principles of Communism, by F. Engels, he has a question and answer discussion. Question 17. Will it be possible to abolish private property with one blow? Answer: no. Such a thing would be just as impossible as at one blow to multiply the exact forces of production to the degree necessary for the inauguration of communal ownership in the means of production. Private property will be abolished only when the necessary quantity of means of production has been created. He states further, democracy will be of no use to the proletariat unless it serves as the means for a direct attack upon private property and for safeguarding the existence of the proletariat. Extant measures make it necessary to introduce the following measures as being those of most importance. 1. Limitation of private property by means of a graduated income tax, high death duties, abolition of inheritance. 2. Gradual expropriation of landed proprietors. 3. Confiscation of the property of all émigrés and rebels against the majority of the people. In current Rhodesia, all white and only white, property owners must give up their property for a nominal reimbursement. Those who object are labeled racists and given nothing. 4. Putting an end to competition among workers themselves. 5. Universal and equal obligation to work for all members of society until the abolition of private property is completed. Question 19. Can such a revolution take place in one country alone? Answer: no. Large-scale industry, by creating a world market, globalism, has so linked up the peoples of the earth, and especially the civilized peoples of the earth, that each of them is dependent on what happens in other lands. The communist revolution will therefore not be a national revolution alone. It will take place in all civilized countries, or at least in Great Britain, the US, France, and Germany, at one and the same time. In each of these countries, it will take a longer or a shorter time to develop, according to whether industrial life has attained a high degree of evolution, has amassed great wealth, and has a considerable quantity of the forces of production at its disposal. The revolution will assume its slowest pace and be most difficult of achievement in Germany. In Great Britain, it will go ahead quickly and easily. It will exercise considerable influence upon all other lands, changing and hastening the process of their development. This is to be a universal revolution, and will therefore have the whole world as field for its operation. Question 21. What influences will the communist order of society have upon the family? Answer: it will make the relations between the sexes a purely individual, private affair which concerns only the two persons involved, a relationship which is in no way the concern of society. This attitude is made possible because private property will have been abolished, and the children will be communally educated. Thereby, the two foundation stones of hitherto extant forms of marriage the dependence of the wife upon her husband and of the children upon the parents, will have been abolished. Engels states, 1891. Nowhere do politicians form a more separate and powerful section of the nation than precisely in North America. There, each of the two major parties which alternately succeed each other in power is itself, in turn, controlled by people who make a business of politics, who speculate on seats in the legislature assemblies of the Union, as well as of the separate states, or who make a living by carrying on agitation for their party, and on its victory are rewarded with positions. It is well known how the Americans have been trying for 30 years to shake off this yoke, which has become intolerable, and how in spite of it all they continue to sink ever deeper in this swamp of corruption. It is precisely in America that we see best how there takes place this process of the state power making itself independent in relation to society, whose mere instrument it was originally intended to be. We find here two great gangs of political speculators who alternately take possession of the state power and exploit it by the most corrupt means and for the most corrupt ends, and the nation is powerless against these two great cartels of politicians, who are ostensibly its servants, but in reality dominate and plunder it. In a letter to F. Weeson in Baird, Texas, 1893, Engels states, "One can be of the opinion that the best method of abolishing the President's office and the Senate in America is to elect men to these positions who are pledged to carry through the abolition, and hence one will act accordingly." Others may be of the opinion that this method is inexpedient. That is a debatable matter. In another letter, dated 1893, Engels states, "In America, money economy has been fully established for more than a century. In Russia, natural economy was all but exclusively the rule. Therefore it stands to reason that the change in Russia must be far more violent, far more incisive, and accompanied by immensely greater suffering than it can be in America. Expecting a people to ignore innate requirements, who possess different innate genetic abilities, will not work over time. The people can be forced to accept the dictator, but the theory will not and has not succeeded." Stalin, Joseph, 1879-1953. It is necessary for communists, Lenin preached, to use any ruse, cunning, unlawful method, evasion, concealment of truth to gain their ends. Years later, Alger Hiss, chief founder of the UN, himself a rock-bound Leninist, said admiringly of Stalin, "He plays for keeps." It is estimated he was responsible for over 40 million murders, some fast, some slow, in the Soviet Union. After Wojciech, Yugoslavia broke away from the Soviet Union with Tito as the ruler of the country. Milovan Djilas, one of Tito's leaders, wrote, "Conversations with Stalin." Mr. Djilas had a few remarks taken place prior to 1953 that, perhaps, are of interest in learning more of the mind of a communist leader. There were anecdotes. Stalin liked one in particular which I told. A Turk and a Montenegrin were talking during a rare moment of truce. The Turk wondered why the Montenegrin constantly waged war. "For plunder," the Montenegrin replied. "We are poor and hope to get some booty. And what are you fighting for?" "For honor and glory," replied the Turk, to which the Montenegrin rejoined, "Everyone fights for what he doesn't have." Stalin commented, roaring, "By God, that's deep. Everyone fights for what he doesn't have." At one point in the book, Dictator states, "At that time, I was still capable of believing that I could be a communist and remain a free man." He also stated, "It is indeed true that no one can take freedom from another without losing his own." Trotsky suspects that Stalin killed Lenin with the excuse that he was shortening his misery. It is claimed that Stalin killed his own wife, or in any case, through his harshness, he caused her to kill herself. Every crime was possible to Stalin, for there was not one he had not committed. Whatever standards we use to take his measure, in any event, let us hope for all time to come to him will fall the glory of being the greatest criminal in history. I was more interested, and am more interested, in how such a dark, cunning, and cruel individual could ever have led one of the greatest and most powerful states, not just for a day or a year, but for 30 years. If we assume the viewpoint of humanity and freedom, history does not know a despot as brutal and as cynical as Stalin was. He was methodical, all-embracing, and total as a criminal. All in all, Stalin was a monster who, while adhering to abstract, absolute, and fundamentally utopian ideas, in practice recognized, and could recognize, only success violence, physical and spiritual extermination. Mao Tse-tung. Mao, born 1893, was one of the 12 founders of the Chinese Communist Party in 1921. He may well be remembered not only as the father of his country, the People's Republic of China, but as the mother, grandmother, and midwife as well. Today, 85% of China's huge billion-plus population live as their grandfathers did. They farm the land with oxen and live very simply. Mao advocated a revolution utilizing these peasants as the catalyst. Mao states, "One requirement of party discipline is that the minority should submit to the majority. It must suppose the decision passed by the majority." On equality, he states, "Absolute equalitarianism became quite serious in the Red Army at one time. Here are some examples. On the matter of allowances to wounded soldiers, there were objections to differentiating between light and serious cases, and a demand for equal allowances for all. When officers rode on horseback, it was regarded not as something necessary for performing their duties, but as a sign of inequality. It even went so far that when there were 2 wounded men and only 1 stretcher, neither could be carried away because each refused to yield priority to the other." We should point out that, before the abolition of capitalism, absolute equalitarianism is a mere illusion of peasants and small proprietors, and that even under socialism, there can be no absolute equality, for material things will then be distributed on the principle of from each, according to his ability, to each according to his work, as well as on that of meeting the needs of the work. But absolute equalitarianism, beyond reason, must be opposed, because it is not required by the struggle. On the contrary, it hinders the struggle. Whoever advocates absolute equalitarianism is wrong. There is a kind of thinking now current in the countryside, which undermines industry and commerce and advocates absolute equalitarianism in land distribution. Such thinking is reactionary, backward and retrogressive in nature. China went to war with Japan after Japan invaded Manchuria. Japan was the stronger power with better warriors. To resist the overthrow and provide a means to unite the masses, on May 7, 1937, Mao states, "In the new stage, democracy is the most essential thing for resistance to Japan, and to work for democracy is to work for resistance to Japan. Resistance and democracy are interdependent, just as are resistance and internal peace, democracy and internal peace. Democracy is the guarantee of resistance, while resistance can provide favorable conditions for developing the movement for democracy." In relation to the war with Japan, Mao further states, "The government must be transformed into a united front government in which the representatives play their part. Secondly, the people must be granted freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and freedom of assembly and association, and the right to take up arms. Thirdly, the people's livelihood must be improved through such measures as the abolition of exorbitant taxes and miscellaneous levies, the reduction of rent and interest." Then, on 11/12/1937, a war of partial resistance, war with Japan, by the government alone without the mass participation of the people, will certainly fail. If such a republic is to be established in China, it must be new democratic, not only in its politics, but also in its economy. The whole world today depends on communism for its salvation, and China is no exception. On liberalism, Mao states, "Liberalism rejects ideological struggle and stands for unprincipled peace, thus giving rise to a decadent Philistine attitude. Liberalism manifests itself in various ways: to let things slide for the sake of peace and friendship when a person has clearly gone wrong, to indulge in irresponsible criticism, not to obey orders, but to give pride of place to one's own opinion, to indulge in personal attacks, pick quarrels, vent personal spite, or seek revenge, to hear incorrect views without rebutting them, and even to hear counter-revolutionary remarks without reporting them, to be among the masses and fail to conduct propaganda and agitation, to see someone harming the interest of the masses and yet not feel indignant, to be aware of one's own mistakes and yet make no attempt to correct them. Liberalism is extremely harmful in a revolutionary collective. It is a corrosive which eats away unity, undermines cohesion, causes apathy, and creates dissension. People who are liberals look upon the principles of Marxism as abstract dogma. They approve of Marxism, but are not prepared to practice it or to practice it in full. They are not prepared to replace their liberalism by Marxism. Liberalism is a manifestation of opportunities and conflicts fundamentally with Marxism. We must use Marxism, which is passive in spirit, to overcome liberalism, which is negative. All loyal, honest, active, and upright communists must unite to oppose the liberal tendencies shown by certain people among us and set them on the right path. This is one of the tasks on our ideological front. Mao states, within the U.S., there are people's democratic forces which are getting stronger every day. The Communists and Workers' Parties of 9 European countries have established their information bureau and issued a call to the people of the world to rise against the imperialists' plan of enslavement. Mao never once defines communism. Perhaps this wisdom lies in the fact that permanent definitions are much less flexible and cannot conform to changes in political, economic, and social conditions. The object of war is specifically to preserve oneself and destroy the enemy. To destroy the enemy means to disarm him or deprive him of the power to resist, and does not mean destroy every member of his forces physically. We should not make the change until, through our work, most of the masses have become conscious of the need and are willing and determined to carry it out. Otherwise, we shall isolate ourselves from the masses. Unless they are conscious and willing, any kind of work that requires their participation will turn out to be a mere formality and will fail. There are two principles here. One is the actual needs of the masses rather than what we fancy they need. And the other is the wishes of the masses, who must make up their minds instead of our making up their minds for them. Our army has always had two policies. First, we must be ruthless to our enemies. We must overpower and annihilate them. Second, we must be kind to our own people, to our comrades, and to our superiors and subordinates, and unite with them. In the sphere of theory, destroy the roots of ultra-democracy. First, it should be pointed out that the danger of ultra-democracy lies in the fact that it damages or even completely wrecks the party organization and weakens or even completely undermines the party's fighting capacity, rendering the party incapable of fulfilling its fighting tasks and thereby causing the defeat of the revolution. Next, it should be pointed out that the source of ultra-democracy consists in the petty bourgeoisie's individualistic aversion to discipline. When this characteristic is brought into the party, it develops into ultra-democratic ideas politically and organizationally. These ideas are utterly incompatible with the fighting tasks of the proletariat. Concerning women, Mao states, in order to build a great socialist society, it is of the utmost importance to arouse the broad masses of women to join in productive activity. Men and women must receive equal pay for equal work and production. Genuine equality between the sexes can only be realized in the process of the socialist transformation of society as a whole. As to the future, Mao promises his own special class war the countryside, with the peasantry in the role of the proletariat versus the city. The oppressed nations and peoples in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, against imperialism and its lackeys, will surround and strangle urbanized North America and Western Europe. the last stronghold of the money-grubbing capitalist and bourgeoisie, corrupt labor unions, and decadent communist revisionists. In the final analysis, the whole course of world revolution hinges on the revolutionary struggles of the Asian, African, and Latin American peoples, who make up the overwhelming majority of the world's population. Machiavelli. Machiavelli was an Italian statesman and writer. He is known chief for the cynical political philosophy expressed in his book, The Prince, written in 1513. His advice to rulers to be scheming, deceitful, and unscrupulous when necessary to advance their interest made Machiavellian, a term expressing cunning and duplicity. Some say The Prince became a textbook for autocratic rulers. Pick out the Machiavellian rulers we have today, in America, in the world. The Prince, dedicated to Lorenzo de' Medici, was written in 1513. It appeared to be a plea to the ruling family of Medicis to make themselves masters of Italy by the most ruthless and unprincipled means. Some scholars believe Machiavelli saw no hope for his country unless a powerful ruler could create by force and deceit, if necessary, an Italian state strong enough to repel foreign invaders. Other historian scholars think that he was only reporting realistically the political methods of his times. Still, others assert that his book was a subtle insult to the Medicis who had exiled him. Quotations from The Prince are stated below. A prudent prince cannot and ought not to keep his word, except when he can do it without injury to himself. The prince must be a lion, but he must also know how to play the fox. To rely wholly on the lion is unwise, and for this reason, a prudent prince neither can nor ought to keep his word, when to keep it is hurtful to him, and the causes which led him to pledge it are removed. If all men were good, this would not be good advice, but since they are dishonest and do not keep faith with you, you in return need not keep faith with them. And no prince was ever at a loss for plausible reasons to cloak a breach of faith. It is necessary indeed to put a good color on this nature, and to be skillful in feigning and dissembling. But men are so simple, and governed so absolutely by their present needs, that he who wishes to deceive will never fail in finding willing dupes. It is well to seem merciful, faithful, humane, religious, and upright, and also to be so. But the mind should remain so balanced that were it needful not to be so, you should be able and know how to change to the contrary. A prince should therefore be very careful that nothing ever escapes his lips which is not replete with the 5 qualities above named, so that to see and hear him, one would think him the embodiment of mercy, good faith, integrity, kindliness, and religion. And there is no virtue which it is more necessary for him to seem to possess than this last, because men in general judge rather by the eye than by the hand, for all can see, but few can touch. Everyone sees what you seem, but few know what you are, and these few dare not oppose themselves to the opinion of the many who have the majesty of the state to back them up. The prince, as I have said before, sooner becomes hated by being rapacious and by interfering with the property and with the women of his subjects than in any other way. From these, therefore, he should abstain. To govern more securely, some princes have disarmed their subjects, others have kept towns subject to them divided by factions. Doubtless, princes become great by vanquishing difficulties and opposition, and fortune on that account, especially when she desires to aggrandize a new prince who has more need than a hereditary prince to win reputation, causes enemies to spring up and incites them to attack him, so that he may have opportunities to overcome them and climb higher by the ladder which they have planted. For this reason, many are of the opinion that a wise prince, when he has the occasion, ought dexterously to promote hostility to himself in certain quarters, in order that his greatness may be enhanced by crushing it. The best fortress you can have is not being hated by your subjects. If they hate you, no fortress will save you, for when once the people take up arms, foreigners are never wanting to assist them. Nothing makes a prince so well thought of as to undertake great enterprises and give striking proofs of his capacity. There are 3 scales of intelligence, one which understands by itself, a second which understands what is shown it by others, and a third, which understands neither by itself nor on the showing of others. The first is most excellent, the second good, and the third worthless. For there is no way to guard against flattery, but by letting it be seen that you take no offense in hearing the truth. But when everyone is free to tell you the truth, respect falls short. Wherefore, a prudent prince should follow a middle course, by choosing certain discreet men from among his subjects, and allowing them alone free leave to speak their minds on any matter on which he asks their opinion, and on none other. But he ought to ask their opinion on everything, and after hearing what they have to say, should reflect and judge for himself. George Orwell. Mr. Orwell, through his fictional writings, 1984 and Animal Farm. He is a teacher of the communist mentality. Orwell states, "Who controls the past controls the future." Both these books, although decades old, should be required reading in our public education system.